My name is Sara Nolan, and I was 27 years old when I lost my job on a Friday evening in November and drove home in the rain with a box of desk items on my passenger seat and the specific hollow feeling of a person whose entire professional identity has just been removed without warning or ceremony or the basic dignity of being told in a room rather than a hallway. I had worked at Mercer Financial for 4 years. 4 years of early mornings and late evenings, and the particular focused discipline of a woman who understood that nothing was going to be handed to her, and that everything worth having required her full attention and her best work, and her willingness to be the last one in the building when the situation required it. The situation had required it often. I had given it often, and on a Friday afternoon in November, my manager had called me into his office and closed the door and told me, with the careful, neutral language of someone coached by HR to say difficult things without saying anything that could be used against the company later, that my position was being eliminated as part of a restructuring and that my last day was today. Not 2 weeks from now, not at the end of the month, today. I had driven to the office that morning thinking about a presentation I needed to finish. I drove away from it that evening with a cardboard box and a parking validation I would never use. I did not call anyone immediately. I drove through the rain for 20 minutes while the city moved around me in the specific, indifferent way that cities move when you are having the worst evening of your life, and nobody around you has any reason to know it. And then I did what I imagine most people would do. I drove to my parents' house. My parents' house was 20 minutes from my apartment, a 4-bedroom colonial on a quiet street where I had grown up, where my bedroom still had the same curtains from when I was 16, where my mother kept a spare key under the third pot on the left side of the porch because she always had. I parked in the driveway. I sat in the car for a moment with the rain on the windshield, and I thought, they will help. That is what family is for. That is what home means when everything else has been taken away. Before I tell you what happened when my father opened that door, please hit like and subscribe. Drop your city and your local time in the comments. I love knowing where you are when you listen to this. Now, let me tell you what my parents said to their daughter on the worst night of her adult life. My father opened the door at 9:47. He was in his gray robe, the one he had worn every evening for as long as I could remember. He looked at me and then at the box in my arms and then back at me, and his expression did the brief recalibration of a man who is settled into his evening and does not expect it to be interrupted. He said, "Sara, what is going on?" I said, "I lost my job today, Dad." I said, "Can I come in?" He did not step back from the door immediately. In every version of this moment I had imagined in the 20-minute drive over, my father had stepped back. In the actual version, he stood in it. He said, "Tonight is not a great night." I said, "I know it is late." I said, "I just need somewhere to be for a little while." My mother appeared in the hallway behind him with a glass of wine and the expression she wore when she had been interrupted during something she was enjoying. She said, "Sara, what happened?" I told her. I watched her face do the recalibration and then something else, a specific pulling back, a withdrawal of warmth, the expression of a woman deciding something. She said, "You cannot stay here tonight." I said, "What?" She said, "We have things happening this weekend. We have plans." I said, "Mom, I lost my job." I said, "I am not asking to move in. I am asking to sleep in my childhood bedroom for one night." She said, "You have your apartment." I said, "I know I have my apartment." I said, "I am here because you are my parents, and this is where I came because I did not know where else to go." My Vrake says, "Sara, your mother is right. This weekend is complicated." He said, "You are going to be okay. You are always okay." You are always okay. The specific warmth of a man delivering a compliment he intends as comfort and does not understand is a dismissal. I looked at my mother. She looked at her wine. I looked at my father. He looked at the box in my arms. I said, "Okay." I turned around. I walked to my car. I put the box on the passenger seat. I sat in the rain. And I remembered something my grandmother had told me 3 years ago at her kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon in September. I started the car. I drove, not back to my apartment, in a different direction entirely. 2 hours south, toward the coast, toward something my parents had never known existed, toward the thing my grandmother had understood I would need before I had understood it myself. My grandmother's name was Dorothy Nolan, and she was 76 years old when she gave me the beach house, and 81 when she died. And in the 5 years between those two events, she was the most honest and deliberate person I have ever known. She had bought the beach house in 1978, the year my grandfather died, with money she had saved for 11 years, and with the specific, quiet determination of a woman who has understood that she needs something that belongs entirely to her. My parents did not know the beach house existed, not because my grandmother was careless or forgetful, because she had specifically chosen not to tell them. 3 years before that Friday in November, she had called me and asked me to come for lunch. She made the roast chicken she always made when she wanted a conversation to feel ordinary. And then after lunch, she put a set of keys on the kitchen table between us and a manila envelope. She said, "Sarah, I want to talk to you about the beach house." I said, "What beach house?" She said, "Exactly." She said it with the small, specific smile of a woman who has been keeping something carefully and is finally ready to show it to someone she trusts. She said, "I have a property I have owned for 40 years that your parents do not know about." She said, "I am giving it to you now while I am still here to see you receive it, because I do not trust that it will reach you if I wait." I picked up the keys. She pushed the envelope toward me. Inside was the deed. Her name crossed out, my name typed below it. Already transferred, already filed, already mine. She said, "It is paid off, no mortgage." She said, "I want you to have somewhere that nobody can take from you." I had not known, sitting at that table 3 years ago, that I would need it so specifically, that on a Friday night in November, I would drive away from my parents' door in the rain and need somewhere to go. My grandmother had known, not the specific details, the shape of it. She had seen the shape of my family clearly for decades, and she had done something about it in the only way available to her, quietly, legally, permanently, before the moment arrived. I pulled into the driveway of the beach house at 11:47 at night, dark and quiet and salt air and the sound of waves. I found the light switch. The lights came on. The heat came on. I put the box of desk items on the kitchen counter. I stood at the window above the sink that my grandmother had said had the best light she had ever cooked in. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass. I am here. I am okay. I have somewhere to be. I had been turned away from my parents' house in the rain, and I was standing in a 3-bedroom beach house that was paid off and in my name, and that nobody had ever been able to take from me because nobody except my grandmother had known it existed. 6 weeks after I started a new job, my parents found out about the beach house. Not from me. I had not decided to tell them, and I had not decided not to tell them. I was in the part of the decision where I was watching and waiting and understanding that some information does not need to be delivered, it simply needs to exist, and that the timing of when it becomes known is sometimes not yours to control. It became known through my Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister, the more honest of the two. She had called me 10 days after the Friday, and I had told her everything: the job, the door, the box, my mother's face, my father's robe, the words, "This weekend is complicated," and then I had told her about the beach house. She had said, "Dorothy gave you the beach house?" I said yes. She said, "I did not know Dorothy had a beach house." I said, "Neither did my parents." Patricia made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a long exhale. She said, "Of course she did." She said, "Dorothy always knew exactly what she was doing. She always knew which one of you needed what, and she did not ask anyone's permission to provide it." 2 weeks later, Patricia told my mother. Not as a weapon, not as a revelation designed to produce a specific response, as information she believed her sister deserved to have. My mother called me 40 minutes after. Her voice was different from her usual calls. This was the raw voice, the voice under the voice. She said, "Sarah?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Patricia told me." I said, "I know." She said, "Your grandmother gave you a beach house?" I said, "Yes." She said, "And she never told us?" I said, "No." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Why?" And I understood she was not asking why my grandmother had given it to me. She was asking why my grandmother had not told her. I said, "Mom, I think you know why." She did not answer. I said, "She wanted me to have something that was mine, something that did not pass through anyone else before it reached me." She said, "That is not fair." I said, "I think she thought it was the fairest thing available to her." My mother said, "Sarah, we did not know you had somewhere to go that night." I said, "I know you did not." I said, "But you knew I had lost my job. You knew I was standing at your door in the rain with a box in my arms." I said, "The beach house did not change what you chose. It just changed what it cost me." She was quiet for a long time after that. I said, "I will call you at the weekend." She said, "Okay." I hung up. Some things, when you finally say them, stop feeling like weights and start feeling like records, accurate, dated, permanent. The full conversation happened on a Saturday morning. My parents drove to my apartment. My mother sat in the chair with the best light. My father sat on the couch. I made coffee and sat across from them and waited. My mother said, "We handled it badly." I said, "Yes." She said, "Your father was not well that weekend. He had been having some chest pain, and I was not in a good place to handle additional stress." I said, "I know that now." I said, "I did not know it then because you did not tell me." I said, "What I knew was that I had lost my job, and I drove to my parents' house in the rain, and you told me you had plans." My father said, "Sarah, I am sorry." He said it the way he had said very few things in my life, directly and without qualification, and with the weight of a man who has sat with something long enough to understand it fully. I said, "I know, Dad." I said, "I believe you." My mother said, "We did not know you had somewhere to go." I said, "I know." I said, "And I want you to understand something about that." I said, "The fact that I had somewhere to go does not change what happened at your door. It changes what it cost me. It does not change what you chose." She looked at the window. She said, "Your grandmother never told us about that house." I said, "No." She said, "She gave it to you instead of telling us it existed." I said, "Yes." She said, "Why did she trust you with it and not us?" I thought about how to answer that honestly without being cruel, because honest and cruel are not the same thing, and I had my grandmother's example of how to be the first without being the second. I said, "Mom, I think she trusted me with it because she knew I would not use it as a tool. She knew I would just live in it when I needed to and take care of it the way she had." She said, "And us?" I said, "I think she thought the information in your hands would become a decision. In my hands, it became a door I could open when I needed to." My mother did not have an answer for that. Neither did my father. We sat in the quiet of my living room and drank the coffee I had made, and outside the window the city went about its Saturday, and inside the room 3 people who had been operating with incomplete pictures of each other tried to be in the same room with the full picture and found it harder and more possible than any of us had expected. We are not fixed. I want to be honest about that, because stories that end with everything fixed are not honest, and I would rather be honest than satisfying. My mother and I are rebuilding something, and rebuilding is slower than building, and messier, and requires both people to keep showing up on days when showing up feels like too much. My father and I talk on Sunday mornings now, brief calls, real ones. The beach house is still mine. I go when I need to think. My grandmother's kitchen still has the best light. I cook in it the way she taught me. I walk the beach in the mornings. I add to the height marks on the doorframe, even though I am 27 and have stopped growing, because some habits are worth keeping regardless of whether they are strictly necessary. I laugh softly. My grandmother built something for 40 years and gave it to me quietly and without conditions, and without anyone's permission. I am trying to be someone worthy of that. I think that is enough. I think that is actually everything. That is my story. If it stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop your city in the comments. Hit subscribe. I will see you in the next one.